All right, it's 2023. What's the best camera to buy to get into photography or videography right now?
I still regularly get people asking me, what's the best camera to buy for $1,000? What's the best camera to buy for event photography? What's the best camera to buy for put in any scenario? And it's a tough question to answer because I need more information. When deciding what camera to buy, there's a few important factors you want to take into consideration. The biggest one being, how much money are you willing to spend? This is probably the biggest one because it will limit your options the most, and it's good to know exactly what you're willing to spend. The next question is, what's important to you specifically? Do you like to shoot photos more? Do you like to shoot videos? Are you more of a landscape guy? Are you more of a sports photographer? These things are all going to impact what features in a camera are important to you. And there's probably another 10 questions I could ask you to gauge what kind of camera is best for you. The problem I've had in the past few years is I get a lot of people asking me what's the best camera for beginners, for people just starting out, people who want to go from shooting with their phones to shooting with a proper camera. What's the best kind of entry-level option? And I've had some trouble recommending cameras. For starters, I like to only recommend stuff that I've personally used, because if you're going to spend thousands of your hard-earned dollars on something because of what I said, I want to make sure it's a good recommendation. For that reason, and pretty much that reason alone, I almost only recommend Canon cameras because it's just what I know. It's not because Sony and Nikon are bad camera brands or something. It's simply because Canon is what I know and Canon is what I can talk about, so that's what I'm going to recommend. The problem with Canon in the past few years though is that I haven't really liked what they've had to recommend in the sub $1,000 category. There was the Canon M50, but I didn't really like that because it used its own weird lens mount and it didn't really have any upgradability. And then there's the Canon Rebel line, which are DSLRs, and they can still be good, but they're not really making EF lenses anymore, so I don't love recommending a Rebel camera. The thing you have to remember about the camera body is it's only half the equation. The lens that you put on there and the options for lenses that you can put on there are just as important, if not more important than the camera itself. So when I'm recommending a camera body, I want to recommend something that people can hold onto the body for a little bit and upgrade to some more professional glass in the future without having to upgrade it to an entirely new camera. Because especially if you're going to drop thousands of dollars on a lens, you maybe don't also want to drop thousands of dollars on a body at the same time. But the lens that you pair with your camera can make all the difference, which is why I used to recommend, even with all these mirrorless cameras, a Rebel camera, because they came with an EF mount, which means they fit all of Canon's EF-L lenses. So you could start shooting on the kit lens, maybe upgrade to a nifty 50 f1.8 lens, and then down the road you could upgrade to something like a 50mm f1.2 or a 70-200 or something that's, you know, in the multi-$1,000 range, and it's still going to work really well on your Rebel camera. But Rebel cameras don't really have very good video features, so it's hard to recommend to someone if they want to shoot video, and Canon is starting to phase out the EF line, even though it's still very good quality stuff. It's not going to be supported in the future, so there's not really a great upgradability path. Enter the Canon R10 and soon to release Canon R50. Finally, some affordable mirrorless cameras that support Canon's RF lenses. What's so great about the R10 is that it has comparable quality to higher end cameras like the R5 and the R6, but it's $1,000 all in for the camera and kit lens.
One thing the R10 will be great for is vlogging like this. So this is what you're actually looking at right now, the R10. I'm shooting at 4K 24 FPS. There's no log or anything on here, but honestly for YouTube, you don't really need log. It's nice to have, but if you're just doing some content creation like this, nothing wrong with just using the R10 in regular 8-bit video. And this is shooting at 18mm, yeah, 18mm on the kit lens. And I don't know, what do you think? It's hard to tell just on the monitor here, but I think it looks pretty decent. And then this is what the R6 looks like. This is what I normally shoot on. Now this isn't a completely fair comparison because I'm shooting with an ND filter, a nicer lens, and I'm shooting in log footage, which means I can color grade this and I have way more flexibility. But just in general, this is a kind of a comparison between what a $3,000 body and a $1,000 body difference is gonna look like. Now, arguably another important element of content creation is the B-roll sequence. So let's see what we can do. The R10 can do 4K 60, so let's see if we can film a little slow-mo B-roll with it. Now, one of the reasons I like the R10, and the biggest reason I'd recommend it over something like a Rebel camera or the Canon M50, is that it has the Canon RF mount on it, which means you can take this little camera and put something like this lens on it. This is important because as you progress as a photographer, you're gonna wanna get better gear and eventually some better lenses. And the nice thing about this body is that you can slap some nice lenses on this camera and still get some amazing results. So let's put this let's put this $3,000 lens on this $1,000 body and see what the results are like.
So here is my best recommendation and a bit of an upgrade path if you want to get started in photography or videography right now. The Canon R10 with the 18-45 kit lens is $1,000 US. You're getting a very capable little camera for $1,000 that has the same image processor as the higher end mirrorless cameras like the R5. It can do 4K video, 24 megapixel photos. It is a crop sensor, but honestly, that shouldn't be a deal breaker for you if you're just getting started. The best part is that it can natively fit all of Canon's RF lenses, so you have an upgrade path. So now let's say you've shot with this setup for a little bit and you're ready to upgrade and expand your options a little bit. The Canon RF 50mm f1.8 is the perfect next level if you're getting tired of your kit lens and want something a little bit better. This lens honestly is probably the best bang for your buck lens you could possibly buy. For less than $200, you're getting an f1.8 aperture, 50mm prime lens, so it's going to be a little bit sharper because it's a prime. It's still not on the same level as an L lens, but it's going to be worlds better than your kit lens, and it's going to look a lot more professional because it'll allow you to get that blurry background that for some reason everyone associates with high-end photography. But now you're talking $1,000 up front, an extra $200 to get this upgraded lens. Now let's say it's been a couple years, you've been shooting, you're starting to get a few paid gigs here and there, you're starting to level up your photography and you feel like your camera just isn't enough anymore. Well, you can keep the camera body and go up to something like an L lens, like a 24-70, maybe a 50mm f1.2, depends on what your needs are. But the point is you can upgrade your lens first because a nice lens on a cheap camera body is always going to be better than a expensive camera body and a cheap lens. So this is what I'd absolutely recommend you do in the future. You have your R10, right? You've got your kit lens or your 50mm lens. So you're gonna keep your R10. Then when you're ready to upgrade, you get that nice newer lens that's going to elevate your photos so much. And then after a little while shooting with that, maybe you're making some money now. Once you start shooting professionally, you're going to start noticing some features on the R10 are not quite up to par. Like there's no dual SD cards, batteries are a little bit smaller. And once those things start to become an issue for you, now you can upgrade your body to something like an R5 or an R6. And those lenses that you invested in earlier, those nice L lenses are still going to work with it. And that's what it all comes down to. Choosing a camera that has the best bang for the buck right now, but also allows you an upgrade path in the future.
One of the things about the R10 that makes it so that you can have a $1,000 camera like this compared to something like the R5 or the R6 at like $3,000 or $4,000 is the build quality. One thing you can really tell with a camera like this is that they've cheaped out a little bit on some of the buttons. For example, the dial back here is not a dial like it is on the R5 or R6. It's just sort of a D-pad with your ISO, flash, delete. Those kind of buttons are on here instead of having extra buttons around, you know, this part of the camera. So you get a lot less custom functions on a camera like this, and the usability level it's just a tad bit harder. It's still usable, but in a professional setting, sometimes those fractions of a second between changing your camera settings matter. So personally, that's why it wouldn't really be the right camera for me. But when you're doing content creation and you don't necessarily need to be changing your settings at the drop of a hat, it's honestly fine. But that's why this can be a $1,000 camera and compete with something like the R6, is because they make those sacrifices. So as long as you can live with that, it's a pretty good camera.
Like I said earlier, the batteries are smaller, which means your battery life is going to be a little bit worse. You're going to have a few less buttons and dials for custom functions, and it has a crop sensor instead of a full frame. Now, if you are shooting professionally, like I am, some of these things would be a deal breaker for you. I would personally never buy the R10 because one, I'd have to carry a whole different type of battery. It doesn't do dual SD card recording, so I don't have a backup right off the bat. Those things alone are a deal breaker for me, but that's only because I'm making money from my gear. But if you can live with having a D-pad on the back of your camera instead of a dial, and you don't mind carrying an extra couple batteries around on a longer shoot, then you can save yourself thousands of dollars. If you think the R10 is the right camera for you based on what I said, I have a link down below where you can check it out. I also have the links to all the gear that I use on a regular basis down there as well. I also get asked all the time, what's the best entry-level mic, the best lights, the best tripod to buy for the budget. So I've created my budget entry-level kit on kit.co. So check out that link in the description and you can see all the gear that I would recommend you get started out with. But that's the end of my video.